in order for you to present something in a court martial, you have to have 90% of the facts to back your case up. In a court of inquiry, you can say, hey, I saw Justin Kramer sleeping on the job back here, and we're about ready to, run him up the flagpole. Young Lance Corporal Kramer needs to go. And it's sort of like in an NJP. It's up to, the convening authority or the commander to say, hey, here's what I decide. And every time that we would have an exculpatory witness with exculpatory evidence, exculpatory meaning he has incontrovertible facts that are proving our case, obviously the defense and prosecuting attorneys, they have the opportunity to screen in advance before they testify on the stand all witnesses. And when they knew, like, this is what he's going to say, they would have this lieutenant colonel, and it's usually a job for maybe a young corporal to escort any media. They flew this guy out from MARSOC in Tampa, and he was in the courtroom for 3.5 weeks. A Marine lieutenant colonel, public affairs officer. He escorted the media. Every time we'd have a witness with exculpatory evidence, he'd move him from there at Camp Lejeune. I'm sure you may be familiar with this courthouse there. Mm-hmm. 2 buildings over, they didn't even want him in the lobby. They didn't want him to catch any whiff of what could be said and from hearing outside the courtroom. They put him in 2 buildings over and on the above Little Andy's Steakhouse, so there was no possible way they could even catch a rumor of what was going on. So this is the kind of stuff, Justin, it goes on in Tehran or Moscow, but this went on. In this book here, A Few Bad Men, this makes Jack Nicholson, it makes A Few Good Men look like it's Recess. And this is A Few Good Men on steroids.
Oh, I think I lost you. I'll cut that piece out. I did want to ask you. The lawyers in your case, and so for people that that haven't listened to our previous podcast, you were on episode 83, and we go into a lot of detail about all this, your court case, your background, and stuff like that as well. So you can go back there and check that out also. But the prosecutor, this is a military court, so these are military members. That's a prosecutor and stuff like that. To me, it's mind blowing that a prosecutor, a member of the military, brought in a Taliban person to prosecute or to testify against you, and that was like I don't know. It's hard for me to imagine a fellow Marine that would do something like that. You know what I'm saying? And I know that's their job as a prosecutor, and they have to follow whatever the evidence shows them or what it supposedly shows them. Figure that stuff out. But it almost, in your case, you and your Marines' case, it seems like, I don't know, the agenda was, there was an agenda behind it. I don't know. It's just to me, it's just mind blowing that a fellow service member would go leaps and bounds, outside of what they're supposed to do to make you look bad, or to get the win. Basically, it's like they're trying to get the win rather than trying to get the truth and some.
Yes.
And I don't know, what's your take on that? That your fellow military members are the same people that are doing this to you.
Good question, and 2 points I want to bring up on that. So, Marines, when they get out of the Marine Corps, they really amaze me, especially Marines in organizations such as MARSOC, Force Reconnaissance, and several of these, ground combat occupations. It just blows me away that some of these guys get out and become electrical engineers, but a couple of these guys, I'm not going to mention their names, and I'm not going to mention the agency, but they're now senior officials in I'll just put it inside the Justice Department. And, they went through this. They were in the trial. And they still, to this day, these are guys that fought in combat, were in Force Reconnaissance as well as Marine Special Operations. They have it's almost impossible to get over that your country, America was founded on laws. We have a legal system that says you have a presumption of innocence, that here's a clear line of departure that you cannot cross because we have some legal boundaries, and you can't treat people unethically or immorally or illegally like this. But these guys that got out, and they've done phenomenally now that time has passed. But they, to this day, in their roles in the Department of Justice, they say we cannot believe not only that this went on, but this book talks about. I mean, all these leaders, Justin, they've gotten away with all this.
Mm-hmm.
A few bad men they all got promoted. I mean, look at these guys on the cover. Here's the Commandant of the Marine Corps awarding one of these guys who totally threw us under the bus, and this is years later. I mean, this isn't some fiction story that looks good for TV or Hollywood. This is a real account of real warriors, not some guy from 10th Typewriter Battalion. I'm talking about commandos trained, and then they go there right on the Afghan-Pakistan border where all these guys radicalized in Pakistan. They come over and they get their jihad on, and that's what they did against us. They blew us up, and then as soon as we returned fire, if they won and they killed us, that would have been a victory for them. But they had an alternate, another side to their sword, and that was, hey, if we lose, we instantly have this triggered to do these massive protests. We're going to spin this up. And then they had the victory of kicking a 115-man commando force out of Afghanistan. But the second part of your question, or the second part of my answer to your question, like, hey, these were military service members that did this. This was 100% intentional. I mean, there's other cases. The reason they called us the MARSOC 7, because there were 7 people that I was one of them, that they were trying to run up the flagpole. But they had 2 other cases with 8 Marines from Hamdaniya, a case in Iraq, and Haditha, another case in Iraq. But those were also highly publicized cases as well. But in our case, they decided we're going to dispose of these guys by dogpiling on them with 45 criminal investigators. We're going to do P for plenty and blow them up. And we're going to, from one side of the life cycle at the beginning of this case to the other, they had this Major Codwalder, and then they had 4 primary attorneys. Even the legal advisor was biased towards the government's case. He had 6 government attorneys, trying to condemn. I mean, there was originally 7 of us, and then 2, myself and 1 other, were co-defendants during the 3.5-week trial. So when you put that many criminal investigators and attorneys, I mean, you're talking 7-to-1 odds, literally. I mean, there was originally 7 of us, and you're using that many investigators. And then you whittle it down to 2. So when you have 50 against 2 and 25, do you see some kind of agenda? Even one of the jury members, they call it panel members, he brought up so one of the NCIS investigators who took the stand, and he was talking, and he said, yeah, I came in here today. I've got a list of things that we feel are inconsistent with the Marines' statements. And this panel member, this jury member, had served as an enlisted Marine in legal services, and he saw the rank bias. And he said, did you create a list of the Afghans' inconsistent statements? He was like, because we've heard all the Marines testify. And maybe they saw something different from where they were sitting in the vehicles, but their sequence of events of, they drove into town, they got blown up, got shot at from the left, shot at from the right. They're consistent. But he said, who ordered you to create this list of inconsistent statements? Because he said he was told to create this. But it shows, Justin, this was very biased. This was a top-down slam dunk. Let's hang these guys out to dry. Let's control the narrative so the media only gets what we want them to get, which, again, that in and of itself is illegal. And, Justin, you probably remember this, and I'm trying to compare apples to airplanes here, but go with me for a second. But at the same time, in the same state, I'm talking North Carolina, 2007, just down the road at Duke, they had these young preppy lacrosse players. I mean, these aren't Marines, they're not commandos, they didn't go to combat, but they're young, rich, preppy kids on the lacrosse team. went out to a strip club, found a gal, and they decided they'll pay her to do this, little strip tease act for the lacrosse team. And one thing led to another, and she claimed that she was raped, and it went to trial. And the prosecuting attorney, Michael Nifong, was disbarred and punished because he withheld state's evidence that did exonerate these guys. But in the American people were outraged that a prosecuting attorney could withhold evidence that could have sent these guys into prison. But when you read this book and you see like one after another, I mean, to threaten to deport someone's mother unless he signed what NCIS concocted. They manufactured the statement that said the 7 of us fired wildly. The Marines were out of control. That fit their NCIS narrative because they wanted a win. So that's the kind of pressure. I mean, you don't just decide, hey, Justin, check this out, JC. We're gonna freelance here, and I want to get this big. I mean, you don't do something like that unless you have a get out of jail free card. Unless somebody above, and you're just the messenger doing the dirty work. But the American military is not a mob. It's not like a bunch of gangsters that have Al Capone handing somebody a wrench or a bat and saying, hey, take this guy out. So notice the title, A Few Bad Men. The Marine Corps is a great organization. I mean, any organization that's founded in a bar, where the actual bar owners bribing people by getting them drunk, telling them, hey, we're going to fight the most powerful, most lethal force in the world. We're going to kick their ass and we're going to win. That's a good organization, like, convincing people like, hey, you're going to be fighters. I'm going to have you're going to be on a ship and you're going to swing across that ship and you're going to use a sword and, spear these guys and kill. I mean, those were some real warriors back then. And that's a real warfighting organization, and it continues. But when you have it infected with a cancer of a few bad men, I mean, everybody knows, General Amos here, later in court, after he retired, they determined that the U.S. Navy Marine Corps Court of Appeals that there was substantial evidence in the case against these, where he was ordering the convening authority then, at that time, because they changed it, but Lieutenant General Waldhauser made a sworn statement that he was told by General Amos, who was the commandant at that time, that he wanted those Marines crushed, that had the snipers who had urinated on the dead bodies of the Taliban. And the court determined that there was substantial evidence that supported that case against General Amos for unlawful command influence. But we have a two-tier justice system, Justin, different spanks for different ranks, and that's the mortal sin of the military, is when you have hypocrisy. And we both wore stripes in uniform, served at those ranks, and when you see some, especially an officer, say something, and be emphatic about it, this is how it's going to be, and then you see him doing the exact opposite and really going overboard doing the exact opposite. You're like, what kind of credibility? And it really puts a horrible taste in your mouth that, this is not what the military is a good organization. You just have bad members, and oftentimes they're never held accountable. Oftentimes they make their careers, as you see in this case, it's in one way it's comparable. I'm not trying to say we were like Julius Caesar, but when you talk about few, I'd say that's debatable, because in this book, just like with Julius Caesar, it wasn't just Brutus that stabbed him. It was all 60 senators. I mean, this book, people made their careers, and it went like a hockey stick. These guys' careers went exponentially north, vertical, at an accelerated rate, because they did what their bosses wanted. They rewarded them for smashing our heads with the bat, throwing us under the bus. You can go on Military Times and Google search Colonel John Nicholson and put it in Military Times and read one of these articles in the 5-part series that Andy D. Grand Prix did, and go down and look at the video link that Colonel Nicholson slams and condemns us in a press conference, and then says from his base in Afghanistan, he's televising this to a Pentagon press conference, and says, Yes, these Marines, this was a terrible, terrible mistake, a stain on our honor. He apologized on behalf of the United States government. And then he says, yes, and we're facilitating Naval Criminal Investigation Service, which is here at their base in Jalalabad, and he is facilitating their investigation. So during an ongoing investigation, how does a colonel get away with, you know, destroying our rights as far as a presumption of innocence? And people say, well, as a military, you give up you never give up the presumption of innocence. And it's a well-known fact that you have to prove your innocence, which is not, that's not constitutional. You don't ever give up your presumption of innocence. But what happened to Colonel Nicholson? Well, got promoted all the way up to 4 stars. It's a fact. And he retired as a 4-star general. Nothing happened to him except he just got promoted in an accelerated way. He got, put in the key billets. If you do the dirty work of the mobsters, Capone and all these dirty guys, they rewarded them. And so it'll spin your head. It'll blow your mind. There's so many things in here, and this is backed up by sworn testimony. So when you read this, this is Colonel Nicholson on the witness stand. And that's another thing, is the Security Classification Guide prohibits people from classifying anything for the purpose of saving someone from embarrassment. Mm-hmm. But this was a gun battle. I mean, we're not talking the locations of submarines at sea or the orbit of satellites or Jason Bourne's knock list. This is guys that shot at some Taliban shooting AK-47s and sniper rifles and blowing us up with homemade explosives. Nothing high speed and technical here. That we went to federal court and we said, we're going to sue you unless we've put in the Freedom of Information Act. And either you release that or we're going to continue to bring this up in court, and this is all going to get out in the public space. So after 11 years, there are some things which I still don't have. I've narrowed it down to one sentence. That's all. I mean, I still have a ton of stuff that I asked for, which they've said no. But since 2018, I've asked for just give me this one sentence. And they say they have it, but they have not given it up. And their constant responses, we're busy. Well, it's 2022, Justin. I mean,
they're basically refusing to unclassify it, is what you're saying?
Yeah, that one sentence. But, you read this book and you see all this other stuff and you're like, why did they classify any of this? And, the readers will read, this is the first time I'm hearing. I mean, this has been publicized and we've gotten our side of the story out, but this is the first time that all of this in one location. And the point of the whole book is this type of malfeasance affects more American citizens than any other employer in the United States. Until just recently, if you stacked Amazon and Walmart's number of employees up together, you would still be short of the active duty, reserve, contractors, and civilian in the United States Department of Defense. But Amazon can't put you on bread and water, and Walmart can't sentence you to death. The max punishment for murder, just like that nut job former Major Hassan Nadal just went on that shooting spree down in Fort Hood, he was sentenced to death, and eventually they will kill him. And when you murder innocent people, like we were falsely accused of, those are the consequences. So, but when your government tries to illegally and unethically prove some false narrative and spin the truth on the American people, we have no tolerance for that. And I know this book is like radioactive. This explains where all the bodies are buried. And is not, I've already had fake social media accounts. I've already had people, this book is not, I mean, this will be published on 7 June. It's not fully edited. It's in the very final stages. This is actually just a cover of another book. So the cover is approved.
Hey,
but my point is, I've already had people slander this book online.
Really?
And they don't even have a copy of it. And they're telling people, I mean, these are senior military officers, retired, telling people, don't waste your time, don't waste your money. Well, that's, again, in America, we disagree on a lot of things, but we agree on a few things that are, the freedom of speech, freedom of the press. I mean, when you are opposing that, that's censorship. I mean, why would you, if you've never read this, if you don't know it, why are you saying, hey, I know that's preemptive, and Justin, there's going to be more. There's going to be, when this comes out, a lot of people are going to be like, but it's all their sworn statements. It's not what I'm saying. It's what they said on the stand. So if you have some gripe, hold the witnesses that said it accountable, because these guys just got promoted and they had it covered up.
It's going to be an interesting time for the book to come out, considering I think a lot of Americans have come to realize the I don't know, the narrative that they're being fed about a lot of things isn't always based in reality. It's based in someone's agenda. It's hard to trust any kind of legacy media outlets nowadays, because we keep finding out that they're lying to us. They're lying to us, or they're not telling us the complete truth or something like that. And then we find out on the back end months later, when it doesn't matter anymore, or to the general public, or when the narrative's already been set. So the narrative for your guys' situation was set, and it was set, and they were like, this is what happened. Here's how the news is covering it. Everyone's saying these are the things that occurred. Oh, these big bad Marines, they're just as bad as the guys that peed on the Taliban. Or I think it was even fake news when they said there was military members in I think it was, I don't know if it was Bagram or whatever. They said they were burning Qurans, and then there was like mass protest in Afghanistan and stuff, and all that turned out to be fake. But the military was like, before it all came out, they're like, hey, we're sorry, we apologize, and it's like, organizations are more apt to react, to be apologetic, and seem like they're putting up that defense a lot sooner, rather than trying to wait for the kind of everything to flesh out. Like, let's get all the details. Let's find out what really happened. Nobody wants to know what really happened. They want to hear the narrative. And once that narrative is said, that's set, and then obviously your guys' exoneration, having been told that obviously you guys didn't do this and that nothing should have happened. That kind of story is not going to get the same kind of coverage as a bunch of special operations military members killed a bunch of people. So yeah, maybe your story, maybe it's coming to light that you guys didn't do anything wrong and it was covered in some outlets, but nowhere near the amount of coverage of the original issue. So the problem there is there's so many people that have never even heard the counter that, hey, that never even occurred. And it sucks because, and I'm sure you could probably, talk about this, but for someone that's been wrongfully accused of something like that, I mean, that can affect you for years, because if anyone looks your name up, that's the first thing that's going to pop up. And they're going to be like, wait, this dude was in the Marines and he's a fucking, he's a murderer. Like, we're not going to hire him for this job, or, hey, we're not going to accept his application for this program. The residual effects from that are just crazy. And I think, again, with everything we've seen over the last couple years between the presidential elections, the whole Russian collusion narrative bullshit, the propaganda coming from every side out of Ukraine right now, people are realizing there's a lot of bullshit that the news reports on and throws out there, and then come to find out they have no idea what they're talking about. It's not even true, Yeah.
Where's the facts that support this? I mean, show us the proof. They don't want to do deep investigation and show you okay, well, here's the bio lab in Ukraine, and here's the actual materials, and here's the receipt that shows that America transferred this money. And but they just want to go with this sensational, tinfoil hat, America has got these labs, and it sounds good. It sounds like, dun, dun, dun. Stay tuned. It's all about selling advertising space and hyping things up. And
for sure.
But you're right. The truth, when it comes out, and that's why, buy the book, because just like you had mentioned, the professional destruction, when you accuse somebody, in this case, it's worse than if somebody's he's accused of beating his wife, or accused of drunk driving, or accused of something that we all say those are bad things. But here's something, accused of mass murdering, a village, just going door to door sport killing. That's what they said we did, that we were drunk and we just went, on a killing spree. People believe that. And an example, I mean, I've got the data right here in I have tailor-made over time. I mean, I've been retired for 8+ years now, but I sent out 700 applications, 700 resumes to open applications that are tailored for specific jobs. And in the first 4.5 years, I was allowed to do one interview I mean, people just weren't even contacting me back.
Mm-hmm.
So, but young other Marines that I'd served with inside the same units, and their names weren't in the spotlight. I mean, these guys have gone on and had incredible careers. So, I mean, you can attribute that, okay, the anomaly is this one guy. He was the guy walking in the courtroom that the media plastered his face all over. He's a poster boy. His name was out there, his rank, his hometown, and we were accused of killing Afghan civilians. So, we're fighting terrorists over there. It's like with Major Hassan Nadal, there are people that get radicalized in the United States, in our own military, that have access to base, have access to weapons. That, I mean, when you voluntarily, as a military, allow media not just to come in the courtroom, take pictures of our faces, but our full names, ranks, hometowns, ages. I mean, the professional destruction that you just did, not just your career in the military is over. I mean, I served 7 more years, but you're not going to ever get promoted. So I I would have continued to serve. And my request to change the fitness reports to remove that adverse fitness report material was to try to continue to serve in the Marine Corps. I didn't want to retire when I did, but I served 7 more years. I was forced to retire due to service limitations. And, the Marine Corps was like, hey, we're not going, even after I had that adverse material removed, they did not agree to, allowing me to, they said, we're not going to let this guy serve in the Marine Corps. And, these civilians have said, remove this material. He's basically a slate's washed clean, but we don't want him back. And I mean, that kind of shunning of an officer who, this will sound boastful. I don't like talking like this about myself, but here's someone I had deployed far more in combat, more combat missions. That's all I was there to do. Mm-hmm. And, to say like, yeah, we just don't want this kind of guy. It says something about the state of our senior military leaders. Then, you have somebody, unfortunately right now, you see people in the military and you're like, that guy, how do you get promoted? I mean, he looks like a water buffalo, like happy as a hog. And then here you have a guy that's, your fitness reports are water walker fitness reports, and they will not allow you to return to service because they simply, they said, we're not going to allow this. Mm-hmm.
What drove you? But what drove you to stay in, though, to want to continue to stay in after being, drugged through the mud, loss of confidence in your leadership, I assume, like what, for most people they'd be like, get the fuck out, get me out of here. Get me out of this organization. Yeah. I want to get away from this. I want to begin the rest of my life. But and I even remember reading about this in the papers, like you said, you were fighting to get a promotion that was denied, or get your fitness reports removed so that you can get the promotion so that you can continue to serve. What drove you to do something like that after all this whole ordeal?
Yes, you're right, Justin, that, a lot of these guys that go through these cases like Eddie Gallagher, these guys from the Haditha and Hamdaniya cases, I mean, once they're accused, they're not saying, hey, sign me up for another one. I want to go straight back. I did, as soon as we were exonerated, I literally that day, I was on a plane to Okinawa, Japan, where I served for 3.5 years, where I deployed from there all across the Pacific, as well as to another combat deployment in Afghanistan on the first one I could go on. And the point is it's not like I have bloodlust or, I want to get back out there. But my career path so at the time that I served, officers, it was very rare. It only happened in a few instances where an infantry officer, that was your primary MOS. At that time, they didn't have an occupational field for reconnaissance officers or Marine special operations officers. You were just an infantry officer. And they told us, it's career suicide if you go to reconnaissance and ever go back, because you're an infantry officer and you need to be commanding infantry Marines. So if you go there, don't stay long and don't ever go back. I was told that as a second lieutenant at the infantry officer course. And when I got into force reconnaissance, the first one was in Okinawa, serving 3 years there as a platoon commander, going all over across the Pacific, and I loved that. Absolutely loved it. And they had to literally move me out of there to the Marine Corps' Top Gun school as an instructor because I love being around those Marines so much. Then they had an incident in California where a 19-year-old Marine role player was shot and killed accidentally, and they removed the platoon commander, platoon sergeant from that force recon platoon that had done this training mission, and the force recon Marine had shot and killed the guy. And so they were searching for a fully trained force reconnaissance platoon commander. There's not a lot, running around in circulation. I was just 3 hours down the road in Yuma, and so they brought me in. I realized at that time as a captain that I'm committing career suicide, but at that time, this was 2001, the war had started, and I wanted to serve in combat. The Marines, in the relationships that you develop, especially in a place like Okinawa, this unit that has been reflagged and is now called 3rd Recon Battalion, but it was 5th Force Reconnaissance. And the Marines in that unit in Okinawa are so committed, and the close-knit relationships. It's like you would do anything for those guys, and any officer that served over there I know has had that same feeling. But I just, being single, I was like, I want to go straight back and serve with those types of Marines, the ones that you can completely count on. And not in all cases, but I've seen over the years, a lot of those Marines came from, not all cases, but came from some broken homes. And to them, what was the most important thing was, they wanted a family, somebody they can truly count on and rely on in all circumstances. And that meant the most. Like, for you to get kicked out of that type of a family would kind of destroy their soul. Sometimes time to time guys would do some things that were wrong, and they would get, punished in JP or court-martial, and they'd leave the unit, and that kind of put this black cloud over them forever. And that's kind of, in this case, what happened to ourselves and us. But, that's why I wanted to get back in that unit so bad and serve again, is the caliber of people that you could totally trust, count on. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But if you can do it a second or a third in a lifetime opportunity, I mean, it's like, I'm not going to say I'm Tom Brady, but it's like, why did Tom Brady come out of retirement? I mean, I think it's like this addiction to working with world-class competitive people that you can trust, that have their hearts and minds in the right place. There's only so many opportunities you're ever going to have to be with Marines of that caliber.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was recently on a podcast called the Just Conversation podcast, and the host is a civilian. And I was telling him, I'm like, a lot of guys will get out of the military, even guys that didn't like being in the military. They'll get out and they're going to be like, man, I miss the military. Because when you get out, you realize you're out in the civilian world with a bunch of people that just don't care, Right. And in the military, there's like a standard there. It's higher. It's a higher standard for just kind of everyday stuff, and it just feels like a cleaner, more like vibrant, more like productive environment. And then when you get out in the real world and no one gives a fuck, it's in the Marine Corps, as stupid as it is, people will walk by trash and pick it up. Like, oh, I see a piece of trash on the ground, I'll pick it up and I'm going to throw it away. Because if I don't, one, I probably should. Two, if I don't, I might get yelled at. No one cares in the real world. There's trash floating around everywhere. It's just stupid little stuff like that makes it different. And even more so when you're in a unit like that, like in Recon or MARSOC or something, where everybody there, not only did they volunteer to be in the military, but they then volunteered to be in this, higher tiered force that everyone around you wants to be there. They earn their spot, and you can trust them, way more than you can the average guy. And so it's got to be hard to leave that kind of environment and then come back out to the real world and just be around people that you can't trust, that you can't rely on. No one cares, no one. I don't know how many times I stopped when I was at Camp Lejeune to pick somebody up that I see walking down the street that needs a ride. A Marine or sailor walking down Lejeune from one place to another. They don't have a car yet or something. And in the real world, I'm not going to do that. And I live in San Diego, so most of the people, I wouldn't need to do that here, but it's just not the same. You know what I'm saying? It's just like,
Right.
I don't know. It's just a different environment. So,
You're right. It's when you leave that bubble of the military. I grew up there in Kansas, and then after I retired, I moved back to Kansas, and Kansas was it was like Mayberry growing up there, and you'd walk, or for me, and I like to go jogging down these trails through the woods, and you'd see people, and used to say, hey, morning, how are you, or whatever, greeting. And people used to say when I was a kid, they'd look you in the eye and say, good morning. When I returned, 26 years later, times had changed and people were more focused. I don't know, maybe the little magic square was telling them, captivated their attention. But you'd say, "How good morning? How are you?" People would look at you like, what's your problem? Like, what?
yeah.
But when you come across a military guy, whether he's wearing a hat or he's got a bumper sticker, and you just say, "Hey, how you doing?" Semper Fi, or they instantly connect, and they will, hey, how's it going? And it doesn't make a difference what they got going on, and good day, bad day. They have that mutual respect. Here's a brother in arms, and so I miss that. There is that bond, that family, and the broader family that we have as Americans, I think, has suffered some of this, the effects of individualism that we all have. With modern technology has got us glued and distracted to, social media or whatever. And not saying, your podcast, everybody is consuming information, but it can be a huge distraction that alters our ability to treat people civilly and humanely. And but that's one thing that to this day, when I'm busy, I work 2 jobs, and life is just so busy for me. Somebody calls me up and is, no matter, just finished working 14 or 15 hours, they call me up. I'm going to call them back as soon as I can, depending on the time or day difference. And they need help. I will do whatever I can to solve that problem. And that's what you have in these really elite units that you serve. And, I'll go off on one example that that Marine who I mentioned, that his family was threatened to be deported unless the Marine signed the statement by Naval Criminal Investigators, so the false manufactured statement that said, these guys fired wildly. So he had that used against him, squeezed in this interrogation by NCIS. You're talking NCIS, they're military members. They may wear suits, but these are guys that went to boot camp, and here they decided, like, here's a weak link, here's a vulnerability, here's somebody that we're going to squeeze, and we don't care what the rule books say. They're going to go out the window because we want this narrative. I understand these guys are messengers. They're not freelancing saying, hey, they are a few bad men, and they've not been held accountable. But to do that to a young Marine, a sergeant that was blown up in this vehicle, and he's got this choice that Marines have decided this is how we're going to have this play out, because we want a conviction, because that's what somebody's telling them to do, that he's going to have to force and decide whether his blood family goes back to Mexico, which they couldn't legally do because whether you're native born or naturalized, 14th Amendment of our Constitution says you cannot have your citizenship revoked. But does this young guy know that when he immigrated here? We wonder what social studies was like for him in East LA. Most Americans couldn't tell you what the 14th Amendment says right now. Or even, but that's what we fight and defend. And, that's what they forced him to make this decision between his brothers in arms and this close knit. He was part of a team of, 5 Marines in this particular deployment. 5 Marines, and so you're very, very close to these guys, extremely close. And what it did to this young guy is it shut down his production of testosterone. It messed up his head. We've been on ABC, we've been on One American News. He's been out, and we've talked about this. But the American people, That's what we're asking. Read the book and contact your congressman, because this is not just, like I said before, this is the largest employer in the United States by far that has more authority to punish people than any other organization, but it is also the number one non-discretionary spending on our federal budget. So, like if you're a business owner and you're like, hey, we are not competitive because inflation's running away, I'm shrinking my profits, and you're going to try to figure out like how to improve your profitability. You go back to finance and then you look at your organization. Well, the American taxpayer, Justin, we've already paid this bill. We're paying for this national defense. Your taxes, they're already going to get taken out on April 15th, or you file an extension, but you're paying the tab whether you drink the beer or not. You've paid for it. And what this does, and I know you've experienced this, Justin, anybody that served, is the morale of the troops that are down there where the rubber meets the road, when they feel that like their senior leadership doesn't give a damn, that erodes, and it causes people to be demoralized. It's like a cancer. It spreads. When you don't trust the people above you because you think that, hey, they'll just throw you under the bus to claw their way to the top. And that's exactly what happened. And unfortunately, that has become a system right now where if there's any stink or odor that something smells bad, they're going to quickly point the finger before any facts are found and condemn you, sell you out. And then if, hey, it comes around that, hey, you're innocent, they're not going to come back and say, hey, man, I'm sorry. The damage is done. And in our case, where it's capital offenses times 19 and times 50 of wounding people, we've never received an apology. That's what, God rest his soul, Congressman Jones, when he never met us before, he stood out on the floor of the House of Representatives and said, these Marines' rights have been maligned, and an apology is in order. Do you think Colonel Nicholson, who was then promoted and retired as a 4-star Army general, do you think he ever apologized? No, he never did. He just got promoted. And that helped him get promoted by being this social justice warrior. We're there winning the hearts and minds of the Afghan people. You read some of the stuff that this guy wrote in this book by Carlotta Gall, who was a New York Times reporter who condemned us several times. He describes how his heart is for the Afghan people. And it sounds so good on the Oprah Winfrey show or on The View, but it just literally makes you sick that a guy will destroy his own brothers in arms to claw his way to the top like he did. And, but there's a lot of immoral people like that, and you have to understand that's what this book's about. It's not condemning the military. The military is a great organization, and you and I, Justin, we understand our nation's defense is now, with threats like Russia and China, internal threats of terrorism still existing. It's more important now than it was probably at the point when we fought for our independence. We need a strong defense, and we're paying for it. So why not fix the problem? I mean, if you have cancer, you don't walk around like, yeah, I'm just going to hope that this changes. No, that's not what you do. I mean, what about the people? I want to bring something up to highlight this. And I've been supporting these 3 personnel serving in Marine Special Operations Command. They've been thrown under the bus. They have an active case. They've been fighting these charges for homicide. It's these 2 Marine gunnery sergeants and a Navy chief. He's a hospital corpsman. In military terms, that's a medic. And but they were over near Bill, Iraq. A big retired Green Beret, 275 pounds. This beast came and they started an argument in the little bar. They threw this guy out, and the Marines were inside in corpsmen, and then they waited, and eventually they left. Outside is this guy, Mr. Rodriguez, retired Green Beret, and 7 of his buddies escalating, and this one gunny, he's trying to de-escalate the situation, and Mr. Rodriguez comes in, punches him twice, comes in a 3rd time, and that's when another Marine gunny that was there, of the 3, comes in, hits the retired Green Beret in the face 1 time. The guy falls backwards, hits his head, knocks him out, and medic, Chief Gilmet immediately treats him. They bring him home. They immediately radio. They notify the command what's happened. They put a watch on him, but he ends up dying of complications from asphyxiation on his vomit. Died in Germany 4 days later. But these guys are being charged with homicide. And to calibrate your gauges, Justin, I'm going to show you why this relates. The guy, Gunnery Sergeant Danny Dreher, here's a guy being charged with homicide. You know what his crime was? He was punched twice and, about ready to come in, and he's trying to de-escalate this. Had his hands down by his side, like, why has it got to be like this? And he's punched. He's facing these charges. So this isn't something that was, like, our case isn't a one-off. Like I told you, the case with the Osprey crash that, the Marine Corps put all the blame on the pilot, saying it was pilot error, took over a decade to right that wrong. Now you have a current case in progress in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, with 3 Marine Special Operations personnel being run up the flagpole after over 3 years. This happened New Year's Eve 2019, and they just dismissed Chief Gilmet's case against Chief Eric Gilmet with prejudice because this full bird colonel from Headquarters Marine Corps, attorney from the staff, the Judge Advocate Division, goes down in last November 2021. This is going on 3 years. The government doesn't have a strong case. They're realizing this is trying to, this goes directly against the right of self-defense. But they have a meeting with 8 of these Marine defense attorneys and say, hey, if you fight for these guys in these types of cases, yeah, you can have a good fitness report that your direct boss writes for you, the regional judge advocate. But the colonel who's on the promotion board will know who you are. The colonel who's the staff judge advocate attorney, he says, this is a small world and you're not going to be protected. So he basically puts this kind of mafia boss thug threat out there to these defense attorneys. And this went to trial last month. And the Navy judge during the trial threw out the case that they were trying to prosecute against Eric Gilmet, Chief Gilmet, threw it out with extreme prejudice, dismissed it with extreme prejudice. And the government is attempting to file an appeal. So it's like, when is enough? After 3 years, you imagine all the legal fees. This isn't a 7th can of beer in the barracks type of offense, like, some minor infraction. This is a homicide. A guy's dead. The chief helped try to save the guy's life to do what he could do. And it's not like there was any malice or they intended to do this, or they threw anything more than one punch. That's what Marines are taught in boot camp. You only destroy what the mission requires. They're taught Marine Corps martial arts and breach your course. You use the minimum amount of force to eliminate the threat, and that's exactly what they did. I mean, Justin, what if you were out with your buds and one of them was attacked down there in the gas lamp in San Diego? I mean, do you not have the right to defend yourself or your friends? I mean, that's the implications. That what if this other gunny didn't step in and try to save his buddy from getting, what if he just sat back and said, hey, I'm going to sit this one out and let his buddy get pulverized? But I don't want to show you a picture of this guy because he's deceased, but I mean, this dude looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger. And he was coming after. So sad thing is yeah, he died, but grown men shouldn't be fighting, especially if you're drunk. And, but the Marines did not intend to do this. My point in this whole thing is, the command is still got these guys appendages in this meat grinder and they're cranking it down. They have families, like you said, this, what goes on in somebody's mind that, and these guys right now, they do, they had earlier wanted to, they're Marine Raiders. They wanted to go back out and deploy, but it's been 3 years. They've had their security clearance pulled. They've been in the press. They've been slandered and libeled, said they committed homicide, and they've been relieved from their jobs. They've had all their proficiency pay, which in the MARSOC, that's substantial. I mean, they got kids and families. So, you're talking, this is college saving, retirement saving. And, for 3 years, 2 of them were selected for promotion, and that's all been, on standby. And they just, obviously, the Marines know that we have these 12 leadership traits. One of them is justice. Another one is decisiveness. And that's what they want is, our Constitution requires that we're afforded a speedy trial, and this is just dragged on in their minds and their families and all these people that they used to be in charge of are now promoted on top of them, and just the professional reputation inside the command and what they're facing or not able to have certain opportunities when they get out. This is wrong. And the Marine Corps, we believe that our leaders are going to do what's just and what's right, and they're not going to delay. And so this case with the MARSOC 3, I encourage listeners to read about the MARSOC 3, and they can support these guys by going on www.congress.gov/connect, contacting their 2 states, the 2 U.S. senators for their state and their 1 district representative, and say, hey, I want you to contact Congressman Louis Gohmert from Texas, who's fighting for these guys, and his military legislative assistant is Derek Miller, and Derek has gone through a similar case like this himself, but these kinds of cases are not one-offs. Derek went through a case. He was actually in prison in Fort Leavenworth for defending himself in Afghanistan. And so the American public, unfortunately, the media doesn't like to cover cases like these. And we ask, you probably have listeners, Justin, I know you do, that have friends that are connected to editors and producers of mainstream media, whether it's print, television, any omni-channel media, that can go out there and say, hey, I heard about this current case with the MARSOC 3. And these guys, I've read up on it. And, they're still hunting these guys down, sending them to a court-martial. I mean, my defense attorney told me when we were going through this, Fred, here's the odds, we have in the military, in the Marine Corps at that time, if you go to a court, there's a 96% conviction rate. That's not good odds. We don't, Justin, your commanders, when you go into combat, they didn't say, here's the deal, gents, we have a 96% fatality rate. We don't go to war if the odds are going to be that most likely we're all going to die. So this is very serious. I mean, they're being charged with homicide. Mm-hmm. And with the conviction rate that high, we need people to support this, raise awareness. We're not saying, hey, here's your decision. I'm just saying, go and read as much as you can that's been in the press, but this needs to get in the mainstream press. And this also needs to get attention of, I know congressmen and women, they have, a small agenda of things that, they're financiers, because every member of Congress, they have what they want to, fight for, but then there's what their pedos, their financiers, the guys that are really pulling the strings. That's what they're going to do. That's their boss. That's what's like, hey, this is the hot tickets on the agenda today. It's what their bosses want. But this needs to be one of them. And voters need to say, hey, look, check this out. I am going to go viral on social media. And if I don't see you publicly go on social media and support these 3 guys, we're going to vote you out. I'm going to do everything within my power to vote you out. They're supposed to be there to represent the people of the United States. And here's 3 guys who've served their country 20 years, senior enlisted now, all E7. They're under fire and they need your help right now. And they're facing the same kind of meat grinder that I went through. This exists and it's a big threat in America. It needs to be reformed. That's another initiative that we're also fighting on. Is everybody talks about equality and social justice. Well, let's take the example of this, because we do have a disconnect where words don't connect with actions. Gunny Sergeant Dreher, web search him. All your listeners, Google search Gunnery Sergeant Danny Draher. He's an African American. He has served his country in special operations. He was punched twice, assaulted. This guy's getting run up the flagpole for trying to, what was his crime? He got punched in the face twice and was about ready to get assaulted a 3rd time. He didn't do anything, but he's, here he's had to endure these legal fees, but they talk about social justice and equality. That's a bunch of bullshit. If the media won't even cover this, but it doesn't quite fit the narrative because they don't like it in the military. It's kind of a traditional organization and it doesn't brief well on the views. So anyway, I'm asking your listeners to take action. These guys also have legal expenses that this isn't, again, it's not a minor infraction. 3 years have gone on. The government, they did this in our case. They'll drag it out to cause you to have to wave the white flag because you just can't. They've basically expensed you out of the fight. They're doing what Russia will probably do, and just like, hey, we'll surround your town, we'll shell you, but we're going to starve you out. And you just can't continue to endure if you don't get the supplies. And that's basically what the prosecution's doing to these men right now. So, but they can go on a website called the United American Patriots, UAP.org. It's the Legal Defense Fund. I'm not a part of it, so there's not a conflict of interest for me. I'm just saying, if they want to support, they can specifically specify that, hey, I want to donate this $100, $1,000, whatever it is, to the MARSOC 3. And they do need help financially for their legal fees. And then they need Congress, they need media to, get greater awareness of this, to say, hey, Houston, we've got a problem. And our men and women, the largest employer in the United States, why should they not have the same justice that a civilian has? And Justin, that in the military, you sometimes, like our case, it was different, where they got people from outside of MARSOC. Currently, now MARSOC's this closed loop. So when they go to court-martial, tried by a jury of their peers, MARSOC used to have elements in Camp Pendleton on the West Coast. Now it's all been pulled back to Camp Lejeune. And the jury of their peers, so that convening authority, Major General Glenn, the commander of Marine Special Operations Command, he appoints who's going to be on the panel, the jury. And those people, if this has been going on, the convening authority has, wanted justice for 3 years. The panel members, the jury, it's not like in civilian court, where civilian court, your promotion, your retention in your profession, your next assignment, it's not determined by the judge. But in the military, it is, especially if it's in a closed loop system like Marine Special Operations Command, where the general, he sits on top and he directly has the final say on your promotion, your retention, your assignments. And there's going to be some in the military that's not true. It's like, hey, just listen to what just happened with Colonel. Type in Colonel Christopher Shaw, SHAW. Read Task and Purpose and many other things have been written, what he threatened those defense attorneys, that, yeah, you can have a fitness report that looks good, but on the promotion board, the colonel, staff judge advocate, the colonel lawyer that's on that promotion board, he knows who you are, and you won't be.
I think I lost you again. Oh.
You can't have senior officers basically drowning some guy out in the Hudson or putting somebody in a bathtub full of concrete. I mean, this is the equivalent of, anyway, read the book. You can pre-order it. You won't be charged until it ships. This will come out on June 7th. The publisher says it'll likely sell out. So if you want to get a copy, you're broken, Justin. What was that?
Okay, I got you. So you cut there for just a second, and then it was just audio with no video. But we did hear you just talking about read the book. It's coming out and everything. Where can I'm getting a little bit of feedback now. Where can people pre-order the book at?
So if you go on Amazon, search bar, type in A Few Bad Men, not A Few Good Men, A Few Bad Men, it'll pop up. Look for the one here. There's usually one book with Clint Eastwood's name that comes up before, but look for this red cover, A Few Bad Men, authored by myself, Fred Galvin, co-author Salmana. They'll be able to pre-order it. It guarantees the price, and it also will not be charged to them until it ships. For those Marines, if they want to direct message me, your listeners, special offer, I will sign a personalized label that they can put on the inside cover. There's plenty of pictures in this book that are black and white. For Marines, I'll send out the 8 primary colors. They can, we're, for those of us that are Neanderthals and just learned to walk upright, you can color in the book with some crayons and amuse yourself with some of these bad men that are in the book. So I encourage your listeners to order it and to forward that on their social media contacts. This is an important issue. I work 2 jobs. This is not some retirement plan for me. But it is something that affects our nation's defense and the morale of those men and women who volunteered, have all volunteer force. They answered our country's call, and they're serving. They're ready to fight if needed. And but this kind of stuff is not one-off cases. And it seems like the Marine Corps has this incredible tradition and incredible reputation. And if you do anything to go contrary to that, and especially where there's allegation, some rumor that somebody died. In our case, there's no body, no blood, no bullet. There's no prima facie evidence that was used against us. It was just rumors. And but it was out there in the press, and it was embarrassing. So we got ran up the flagpole and wire brushed. Your listeners can do something to prevent this from happening to other sons and daughters of America that are serving in our military. So this should have no place in the American military.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, situations like yours, and the MARSOC 3 and, these other situations coming to light, plus like all the sexual assault stuff that people have talked about over the years, there's a big push right now to reform military law, military justice, because a lot of people see it as being unfair. They see it with people running the system that aren't necessarily qualified to be making these like decisions. Some random commander of a unit doesn't necessarily, he could have a degree in anything. And so to say that they're automatically qualified to make like decisions that really affect the lives and livelihoods of people, under their charge, I don't know, man. It's, I'm lucky, I guess I never had to deal with the military legal system. It sucks when you see it, man. And that's what I was saying kind of at the beginning. It's almost unbelievable to see fellow military members, go out of their way to make you look bad when you did nothing wrong. When it's like now there's a difference between, hey, they're just acting on the evidence that they have, and there's a difference between that and then actually like, hey, we're not going to bring evidence forward because it hurts our we're going to threaten someone to put false evidence out there to help our case. It's like, that's just kind of mind-blowing. Yeah, that's just kind of mind-blowing that occurs, and it's, the reality is there's shitty people in every occupation. There's always a 10%, and you're going to have that, and it sucks. And I don't know how we can make it better. I don't know what the way forward is. Accountability is one thing, and I think we've all seen,
yes.
If you're one of the, one of our betters, one of these higher ups or one of these people of note, it seems like these people don't necessarily have to pay for their crimes, or they have a different kind of legal system that they're going through than the rest of us. Oh. And I don't know, man. It's just so frustrating. It's very frustrating. I mean, just the other day there was I think it was an Air Force colonel or general. I think I'd have to double check, but someone higher up in the military was charged with sexual assault, found guilty. But they're still letting them retire. They're letting them retire from the military with their full benefits and stuff like that. And it's like, if anyone else would have done something like that, if that was a Lance Corporal that had, inappropriately touched another Marine, female Marine, or anything like that, they'd be in the brig. They'd be in prison. They'd be serving prison time. But if you are a colonel or above, or you're a politician, or you're a relative of a politician, you somehow have this past where we all say, hey, that was bad. You shouldn't have done that. But then there's no accountability other than, oh, you shouldn't have done that. You're a bad person, whereas the regular guy gets put in jail,
Look at General Petraeus. Here's a 4-star general in Afghanistan assigned to command all the troops, supposed to win the war. And he invites he's married with 4 kids. He invites a female reserve Army officer with 4 kids, married with 4 kids. He invites her into his chambers repetitively to author a book, and all he gets is a little slap on the wrist, a little fine for divulging classified information. But what about the adultery? Mm-hmm. I mean, I go back to the hypocrisy being the mortal sin of the military. think when he was in charge of all forces in Iraq, and then when he was in charge of all forces in Afghanistan, then he was a CENTCOM commander. So he's in charge of all forces in the Middle East. How many packages that guy bottom lined with his signature to kick people out of the military for doing the same thing that he did, which he didn't get kicked out of the military. He went on to be in charge of the CIA. Now he's teaching courses at several universities on the board of KKR. I mean, these guys, they're treated like, legends, and the American public thinks that you can't say anything bad, that we need to genuflect and have all this respect and honor. It's like, no, I'm not saying that they didn't do anything good. I'm just saying at this time and point, at this intersection, let's examine what they did right there. Mm-hmm. Because that is what they have condemned several other people who have paid full price, and they are saying, hey, and that's my thing is, you look at a guy like in the MARSOC 3, I'm going to go back to that case. These guys fought for 20 years. Case like Danny Dreher, combat wounded, awarded for valor, for heroism. And they won't have any. Now they don't have any of their officers. That's what I'm telling the public. Where's their officers? Where's their leaders that they served beside when that guy got wounded, when that guy was decorated for heroism, for doing these great, unbelievable things? Why won't these guys stand up? Well, it's because they're in this system where standing up for somebody, how could you not stand up for a guy that was punched? I mean, that's what he did. But you won't even stand up for this guy? They're all buckling. And this is a big problem. It's a cancer when our leaders, the commanders, the officers in special operations, from Marine special operations, won't even sign a character witness letter for a guy. Mm-hmm. We've got some problems here. Houston, if this doesn't get fixed, we got some catastrophic problems. So ask your listeners, when you say, something needs to happen, the first step, and like I said, this isn't, an issue for Fred Galvin. This is an issue for the American people. If you don't read this book, you will not understand. You're going to be susceptible to this mis and disinformation. Oh, Fred Galvin's this is. There's already stuff out there in social media, people saying their opinion of this book, and it's not even published yet. So people will be gullible. You got to read the book, because other than me telling my life story and then it goes in the courtroom, what happened in the courtroom is it's been declassified. We fought twice in federal court to get this released, and now almost all of it has. They still won't let some of it, but it's their own sworn testimony. I didn't force General Peter Pace, then the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, to publicly say in front of the press that he spoke to the commandant, General Conway, and General Conway said he's very disappointed in the Marines. When you say that during an ongoing criminal investigation, and when you had our commanding general of Marine Special Operations Command, General Dennis Halick, go testify to Congress immediately after we return and we're under a criminal investigation, and testified to Congress, I mean, he should have just said, there's an investigation. There's a presumption of innocence. I can't say anything. I'm not going to bias this. But then you had Adam Smith, right after General Halick talked, here's a congressman from the state of Washington saying, at a minimum, this is excessive force. It's like, you don't know. Mm-hmm. But when politicians, when generals, or, also known as, politicians in uniform, when they slander you and say defamatory statements to the press and in public and to formations of Marines, slandering us like has happened, and the same thing's going on currently as we are recording this. 3 men serving in the Marine Special Operations over 20 years, multiple combat deployments. Their time in the military has been war. And not just people in that command won't stand up and fight for them, but I'm asking your listeners, will you use your computer and your phone and pick up and dial in, find your member of Congress, senators and congressmen or women, and contact them and say, contact Louis Gohmert and contact their Washington, D.C. office and ask to speak to Derek Miller, his military legislative assistant, and demand that your member of Congress, fight for these 3 men. You can do that. I'm not asking you to putting money. If you don't have any money, then take some action and urge that we have reform of our military justice system. This is a cancer we cannot have. And like the saying's always been said, all it takes for evil to prevail is for a few good men to do nothing, and be one of the few good men that does something.
Well, Fred, I think that's a good spot to end it. I know you're on a hard timeline here, so I appreciate you coming back on to talk about your story.
Thank you very much, Dustin.
Again, I think it's great that more and more people are seeing that the information that they're receiving from what they consider to be reliable sources is turning out to be not reliable. And there's always two sides to every story. And, my takeaway from this for a lot of, my takeaway is, I always tell people never trust anything. We have our phone, you have a cell phone in your hand that contains a shit ton of information. There's no reason why you can't do a little bit of research and find out a little bit more background info than whatever narrative you're being fed is. There's always a little bit more to the story than what the newspaper is telling you or the news media is telling you and stuff like that. And I think this just goes to show that. And it sucks because, again, once a narrative is set, people want to stick with that narrative and not if you try to get away from that narrative, then it looks like you're placating to the people that did something wrong, in theory or whatever. And it's just kind of ridiculous. And again, thanks for coming on and promoting your book. I hope people check that out. And, definitely reach out to your political leaders and tell them you're tired. You're just tired of the misinformation and the disinformation and just a straight up lying and people getting away with lying about stuff like this. Especially, people in military, like you said, you're signing up for a job that can, it's the most serious of jobs. Yeah, and you're going into that with the trust that, you're going to be taken care of by the people around you, by the government that's sending you off to do different things and stuff like that. And to lose that kind of trust is to lose the military. It's just not going to be able to stand. If, like you said, if I'm in a platoon, but I don't trust anyone that's above me, any of my leadership, then I don't know. It's just not a good situation for sure. So again, Fred, thanks again.
Then to fight.
Yeah. So a few bad men can.
Justin,
go ahead.
I just wanted to thank you for allowing me to be a guest on your show, and thank you for serving in the Marines and serving in combat. I really appreciate your service, the service that our combat veterans and veterans have done for our country, and for getting this word out. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, everybody can check out his book, A Few Bad Men. Get that pre-order going. That really helps drive up, sales for that book and getting the word out. Pre-orders are huge for book releases and stuff like that. I will put the link for your website in the show description so people can check that out. And then outside of that, everybody can check out my Instagram page. It's at Former Action Guys and at Former Action News. I switched my J. Kramer Graphics page to Former Action News because I cover more news than anything. And like a lot of people, I'm so frustrated with these false narratives that are being put out there and no one is fact checking it. And so many Americans are being duped into thinking something is one thing and it's really something else. And so I'm trying to do my part and try to put out some factual information or some counters to some of this bullshit that's coming out there. Just inform the public. So check out my pages at Former Action Guys, at Former Action News, and that's it.